Well, good morning. You're all in your places with sunshiny faces. Okay, Luke chapter 10 this morning. I have a dry throat, so I have a lozenger in my mouth, and I'll try to talk around it. So if I sound a little thick, that's why. It really is a lozenger. I know stories about a preacher who one time he put a mint in his mouth and he preached for as long as the mint was there, and one morning he went really, really long, and so his wife asked him, said, "You went really long this morning." So what happened? He says, "Oh, that wasn't a mint, it was a button." Okay, our lesson this morning is I serve others. I serve others. I apologize. In the upper right it says February 26. I can't add. 18 and 7 is 25, not 26. So, okay. Our lesson this morning, I serve others. We are constantly bombarded by information. And this may be on several different levels, all at the same time. And I've listed just a few of the information pathways that happen. Think about the information that you have heard just in the last couple days about politics. Okay? You're listening on the news. Okay, on the half hour, if you're listening to the nightly news. Information about schools. Okay? Schools, things happening about schools. Schools closing early. Schools, okay? Schools where they are doing, instead of emphasizing on the reading, writing, and arithmetic, they are focusing on crazy stuff, okay? In fact, in some places, the schools are doing things that the parents don't have anything that's going on, and that is so absolutely wrong. Social norms. You know that social norms are changing. Does not mean that right and wrong is changing, but what they are doing or what they are calling right and wrong. Work, okay, what you do for work, and I don't necessarily mean what you get paid for, okay, what you do, and even shopping. On the way here, learned something new this morning about one of the businesses in this area. They've been closed on Sundays because of, I think, because they couldn't get enough help. And now they're open from Sunday. On Sunday, they're open from 2 to 9. Probably they're getting more help. I don't know. Okay, so this information that we are being bombarded with, it can be overwhelming. Some of it, I don't have any control over it, so I just let it go. Other stuff just makes me mad. Okay, some of it is genuinely upsetting. So again, it can be a lot to process. Okay, question number 2. When you think of a servant, what comes to mind? When you think of a servant? A maid or a butler? Yeah. Someone's, yes, engaged in service. Yep. Now, when we're talking, I'll say servants in the Bible, You know that there were different, I'll say, levels of servants. There were people who worked for somebody else, and that would be classified, as a servant of them. There would be those who, because of a debt, they would sell themselves as a servant. They would pay that debt off by working it off. We know that there was out and out slavery. So all of these things, when we are thinking about a servant and serving, different levels. Maybe we think of a waitress at a restaurant, okay? Someone who is serving us, or maybe we think of someone at a hotel where we are staying. Maybe it's even the clerk at the store. In all of these, I'm sure that you have heard and seen people treat servants poorly. Have you seen that? Have you heard that? People that they treat them like they are dirt, okay? Nasty, rude. Now, when we're thinking about serving and thinking about Jesus, Jesus did not come to be served, but he came to serve. And that's very important when we think about what Jesus said and what he did. And Jesus said, whoever wants to be first must become your servant. So if you want to be a leader, you're going to serve. Okay, question number 3. What are good qualities in neighbors? Think about your neighbors. What are good qualities in neighbors? Friendly. I don't have my chalkboard, so I can't write them up, but remember, friendly. Caring. They bring you a meal once in a while, yes. Yes. Yeah. Right? Goes both ways. Yeah. Respectful of property. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. All great things. What was that? Giving a ride. Yes. Nice. Now, we can do the opposite of that, right? What are bad qualities in neighbors? Snubbing. Yeah. Loud. Yep. Yes. Being unkind. Being rude. Yep. Crude language. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, they don't take care of their property. Yes. Yeah. So, as we are going through our lesson this morning and thinking about, Jesus is going to talk about in Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 29, who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? So we need to look at the scripture. Luke 10:25. One occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Not a good situation, but we'll move on. Teacher, he asked. And since he's doing this to test Jesus, when he says teacher, you know he's being sarcastic, right? He does not mean that respectfully as a rabbi. The word there is rabbi. And he is not honoring him as a rabbi. He's being disrespectful. What must I do to inherit eternal life? And so Jesus answered, if you had red letter Bible, it says in red, what is written in the law? And how do you read it? The man answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart with all your soul, and with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Verse 28, you have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this, and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus. Now, remember, we've said that he is not being respectful. So, how do you suppose this man said this next line? I haven't read it yet. Anybody want to take a stab at maybe how he said this? The next line. Sandy? Oh, I'm sorry. Verse 29. The last part of verse 29. Okay, all right. Yeah. Who is my neighbor? Yeah. Anybody else want just a little bit of emphasis on that? So say it more sarcastically than she did. Yeah. Who is my neighbor? Yeah. Who's my neighbor? All of those things, okay? That way. Because why? Why do we say that? Because in the first part of the verse, it says, because he wanted to justify himself. And when people want to justify themselves, they say things that are sarcastic to bring you down to make themselves look better. So, to illustrate this, Jesus told a story. He often, this is one of Jesus' teaching methods. We are very familiar with the story of the Good Samaritan. In fact, if I asked any one of you to stand up and tell us a story, you would be able to tell the whole story. So you know the story really well. So, a man is beaten, he's robbed, and he's left for dead. Okay, got that? And men who should have helped, they pass by. And a second-class citizen, in the view of the crowd and the view of this man, actually helped the man who was beaten. Okay, so that's the gist of the story. Now, as we look at this, in question number 5, the Good Samaritan had the same choices as the previous two men. Okay? He could have crossed over to the other side when he saw the man that was beaten. Okay? He could have thought about himself, his safety. He could have thought about his trip. If I help him, it's going to delay me. I'm not going to be able to. I'm going to be late. I might get dirty. Or he may have thought about his nationality. He may have thought, I am a Samaritan, and this man is a Jew, and I shouldn't touch him. I shouldn't help him. He wouldn't help me. All these thoughts could have been going through this man. He saw the beaten man. He saw him. He took him to a place of, he went to him. He dressed his wounds. And then he took him to a place of safety, took him to an inn. And not only that, but to the innkeeper. He gave the innkeeper some money. And he said, this should cover his expenses until he's on his feet. But he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any expenses that you may have in taking care of him. I come by this way a lot. So that is the nutshell of this story. Now, in question number 6, serving does not happen by accident. Now, think of ways, well, in this story, how did this Good Samaritan serve the man who was beaten? How did he serve him? Okay, by helping. Sandy? Yeah, he picked him up. Yep. What else did he do? He paid for him. What did he do to the wounds? He dressed the wounds. Now, many people, at the sight of blood, they faint. Okay? Someone may say, oh, I can't stand the sight of blood, I can't help. Okay? Now, you know that this is not a passage of Scripture that is advocating for you and I to put ourselves in harm's way. You know that, right? And you know that this story happened, that Jesus has given, it happened a long time ago. And today, we know there are all kinds of wicked people out there that do wicked things, right? So you have to be safe yourself. Think, Mike, you're a big guy, all right? You can take care of yourself. But you have to think about being safe. Ladies, you have to think about being safe. And so we're not advocating that you put yourself in harm's way at all. And you have to be smart. Our daughter told us this week about in Walmart in Missouri, a man right in the checkout line, someone tried to kidnap like a 5-year-old who was with their parent. The guy grabbed them and tried to take them out of the store. And people intervened and stopped it. And in looking at that, in my grampy mode, all right, my grampy mode is I'm going to separate the hands and that guy is going to get a thrashing. That's my grampy mode, right? How dare you, okay? But I can't do that. Well, it's not a good thing to thrash people. But because a lot of these people, they don't work alone. And if if I pull them apart and I start to take matters into my own hands, they may have somebody else that's working with them, and they grab the granddaughter or grandchild, and they're gone. Okay? So I have to keep focus on what's the most important priority is to keep them safe. Jesus is talking about being a good neighbor, but he is not talking about putting ourselves in harm's way. There are plenty of things that you and I can do in, I'll say, in dangerous situations that don't involve us putting ourselves in harm's way. Sandy? Yes. You're absolutely right. Yeah. And at the end of the verse it says, when I come back, I come this way all the time. When I come back by, I will reimburse you. Okay? I'll pay for it. So serving is always a choice to do something. To serve someone, it's 50-50. You're going to help or not going to help. That's the choice. Serving is rarely convenient. Now, we can look at all three of the individuals that were in this story who passed that way. It was not convenient for any of them. It was no more convenient for the Samaritan than it was for the Levite or for the priest. Now, the Levites and the priests in the story, the priests that worked in the temple, or the priests that were in the local village, they were of the tribe of Levi. You remember that, right? But not all Levites were priests. Underneath Levi, the tribe of Levi, the tribe of the clan of Aaron were the priests. And so the Levites, they had different families, different clans, and those different clans were responsible for different parts of the tabernacle or for the temple. And so the Levite is someone that's a descendant of Levi, but he does not do sacrifices. He doesn't offer incense. He doesn't do, he wouldn't do he wouldn't do priestly type things. The priest, on the other hand, would do all of the sacrificial things here. If you sinned, you would take sacrifice to the priest, and then he would offer that for you. But both of them were ministers, if you will. And if someone's going to help, you would expect that the ministers would help. And in this situation, they don't. Serving is not something we necessarily want to do or that we enjoy doing. And in this situation, you may not want to go look at that man who's bleeding. You may not want to dress those wounds, but he did it because it needed to be done. Okay, question number 7. The kindness of the Samaritan shocked the crowd. They were shocked. This was it was not an enemy of the Jews, but it was someone. There was someone that the crowd considered, because they were half Jewish. The crowd considered them unclean or second-class citizens. Now, the Samaritans were, you remember when Israel was divided under Rehoboam and Jeroboam, Rehoboam the son of Solomon. And Rehoboam did not consent to rule, fewer taxes, to be kinder. Instead, he was going to be fierce. And as a result, the northern 10 tribes revolted, and they became Israel, and the southern 2 tribes became Judah. Israel, the northern 10 tribes, in around 750 BC, they were attacked and overrun by the Assyrians. And they were carried off to a place called Nineveh. You've heard of that before. And the Assyrians were cruel people. They carried them off, and the Jewish people that were carried off, they never returned as a group. A few of them did come back, but not very many. The Assyrians went across the land trying to capture everybody they could. But as you can probably imagine, they didn't get everybody, okay? Some people got away, and they stayed in their farms, and they stayed on their land, and they lived there. But the ones that survived, they did not remain Jewish. In other words, they did what God told them not to do. They intermarried with the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Jebusites and all of the ites, all of the Canaanite people in the area, the Philistines. They intermarried with them. And as a result, they lost a lot of their Jewish traditions. You remember that Israel, or Judah, with Nebuchadnezzar, They were conquered around 600 BC, and they were carried off to Babylon. You remember that whole story. 70 years later, they were allowed to come back and live in Judah. And they actually had their own king, and though they called him a governor, and they were given the right to take care of themselves. So they came back as Jews. They did not intermarry with the Babylonians. They stayed a pure race. So when the Jews came back from Babylon, and they discovered that the Samaritans had not stayed full Jewish, marrying all the customs, they considered them to be inferior. Okay, so you get that mentality, that picture? That's why this happened. In fact, in Jesus' day, now that's 600 years later, the unfriendliness between the two groups, the Jews of Judah would not have anything to do with the half-Jewish people of Samaria in the middle. And so if the Jews from up north around Galilee, if they were going down to Jerusalem, they would cross Jordan and go about 4 or 5 miles out of the way this way, go down the east bank of Jordan, and then near Jerusalem cross back over the Jordan. They wouldn't even walk through their land. So they just looked down their noses. So they really did consider them as second class. And so when Jesus makes the second-class Samaritan the hero of this story, it shocked them. Now, the crowd may not have blamed the priest or the temple assistant for passing by the man. Okay? They have, oh, well, you know, the priest and the Levite, he had a job to do, and they could have been robbed, or they could have been unclean themselves. Like now, on the way to church, if you had a flat tire and someone stopped to change it, what do you suppose they would look like after changing the tire? They're going to be dirty, right? Okay? And changing a tire on the way to church, okay, I've got half my suit on, okay? I'm probably going to get my sleeves dirty, okay? We think about that being unclean. But in this time period, as a Levite, as any person, if you touched someone who had been beaten up like this, or someone who had been, beaten, or they've been chewed up by an animal or something, if you ministered to them, you would become unclean. They were not supposed to, they weren't supposed to touch anything that was unclean and then go to temple. Okay? If they were going to have, maybe they're going to a special supper, or if it was Sabbath, then they would not be able to eat the meal. They would have to stay outside. They would have to wash, and then for 24 hours they would be unclean. So they may have thought, oh no, well that priest, he couldn't do that, because if he touched that person, and he was maybe the Levite was on his way to do a wedding, okay? And if he was going to do the wedding, when he got there, because he now was unclean, he would have to tell them, I can't do the wedding because I'm unclean. Or, if he was going to do a circumcision, okay, he wouldn't be able to do that because he's unclean. The same way with the priest, if he was going to do a sacrifice for someone, then he would be unclean. He wouldn't be able to do it. And so They would have been, the crowd may have, oh yeah, that he couldn't have done that. They couldn't have done that. They may not have thought that was so bad. Now, in this, both the two people that passed by and the crowd, they ignored higher purity laws for selfish reasons. Everything I just told you about touching something that was unclean made them unclean. They had to wash, and then they themselves would be unclean for 24 hours. Now, what was behind that was, in their day, what happened with diseases. Okay? When you touch somebody that, let's say an animal bit them or something, you could get that on yourself. And you could become infected. Okay? The man's wounds, okay? You could get an infection from that. And so that was necessary that God put those laws out there so that disease would be kept to a minimum. And that was good. But the preservation of life was a higher moral law. Remember when Jesus said to them, well, if your donkey fell in a pit on a Sabbath, what would you do? You wouldn't leave it in the pit. You would take it out. Okay? Saving a life would not have made them unclean. So they were probably using it as an excuse. And again, they were traveling down from Jerusalem to Jericho. So most likely, their service was all done. They were just probably going home. Now, to take care of someone, it becomes personal, doesn't it? Okay? You have to look at that person. You have to you have to think about this. The man, as Sandy said, the Samaritan, he was prepared. He had a first aid kit of the day. Okay? And he used his own medicine, his own oil, his own clothes, his own money. And he made sacrifices on behalf of the poor man. That's getting involved. And so what Jesus is driving at is not just enough to love people with words. We must own the moments that God gives us. Such moments may not present themselves again. That might be the only time this Samaritan ever has that. So in that story. And the poor man, he needs help now. Okay? If he was bleeding, you need to stop the bleeding. Okay? He can't wait for another time. Now, go down to verses 36 and 37. Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied. Now, how do you think these words felt coming out of his mouth? After being so sarcastic, the one who had mercy on him. That was the neighbor. And then Jesus simply said, okay, you go and do likewise. As a believer, we sign up for a life of service. Okay? We help one another. Jesus is not saying that serving is a good idea. He's not saying it's a good idea. It's something that needs to be done. He is saying to be like him when we reach out to others. To be like Jesus. How would Jesus have reached out? This Good Samaritan reached out. We should reach out. And again, we must keep our eyes on the Lord when we are serving. We always keep our eyes on the Lord. Don't get our eyes on stuff and things. Also, we're not talking about putting yourself in harm's way. I'm repeating myself there, but always be safe. So in these verses that we have read, the expert tried to trip him up. The expert came there to trip him up, but Jesus turned the tables on him. Okay? Jesus always turned the tables on people. There are still people that are trying to make Christians look foolish and stupid and dumb. There's a new term that is being used for Christians who follow the Lord in a moral and, I'll say, biblical way. You may have heard it this week. It's called Christian nationalists. Have you heard that term? Christian nationalists. They are trying to portray Christians who think that abortion is murder. You're almost terrorists. They're likening you very close to, I'll say, Nazis, because you believe the Bible, because you believe in the morality that the Bible teaches. We need to be very careful today in our understanding of what people are saying about Christians. We are called to be kind. We are not called to, in turn, bring unkind things or vengeance upon people that we disagree with. We must always leave the door open for people to have an eye-opening moment. There are people that have been against Christianity, and something has happened, and they accept Christianity. That is the definition of being a Christian, right? I once was lost, but now I'm saved. We should never gloat when people fail or make mistakes. We shouldn't fall into the trap of the world. That's how the world operates. We shouldn't do that. So, we should make room and time to serve. And serving goes beyond our family and our friends. This story, the man was willing to help someone that was, out of his circle. We are called to serve co-workers, classmates, strangers, even enemies. Jesus said we are to love our enemies, and in so doing, what do? Heap coals upon their head, okay? As we are kind to them, maybe in that kindness we can win them to the Lord. Every person matters to the Lord. That's one of the points of this story, right? Jesus was making the point that the Samaritans were valuable. We ought not to think of anybody or any group of people as being second-class citizens or undeserving of the love of Christ. We shouldn't act or walk or talk like that. And they should all matter to us. And so the bottom line of this story is to the Good Samaritan, or to the expert of the law, go and do likewise. And so what's the admonition to you and to me today? Go and do likewise. To be kind. to be loving, to be serving one to another. Amen. Well, that's our lesson for today, and I have next week's lesson, March 3rd, to pass out, and I'm going to ask Judy if she will pass that out. I apologize for the